My name is Matthew Jobe Thornton, and I am originally from Wyoming, and I moved to Urbana about 3 years ago. And I've been going to ISU. I'm an art education major at ISU. I love the idea of having two paintings that are interacting with one another. So like whether it's two paintings or three paintings, and there's the whole thing of like the rule of three, where you have like, if that's two, there's just double of what it is, and if there's three, then it's actually a repetition of something that's going to continue to go on forever and ever and ever. So that's kind of where that is, and the idea of just having two competing paintings or two paintings that are talking to each other is interesting to me. I actually painted mother and child after I painted some of those other sculptural type paintings, and I did that to kind of give a bridge to where that was coming from. And that's kind of how mother and child came about. They kind of feed off each one another, and it's kind of, like I said, it's like a bridge to like, okay, from these other kind of abstract paintings to this format of 3D versus 3D paintings and what paintings are. I think when I took this class, I was really kind of disappointed about it. I was like, oh no, I gotta take this abstract class. And I didn't really want to do it because I'm more of a realist painter, where I paint like things that are in front of me, things that I take from photographs and repaint them. So I was really kind of disappointed. But then once I took this class, I really got into it. I thought it was really, I got into the idea of like making a painting that wasn't about myself, that was for the viewer instead of myself. And that's when a lot of things changed. And I think that's the main thing that I took out of this, was like that it freed me up as an artist to be like, I don't have to talk about myself anymore. I don't have to say things. I don't have to tell you about what I'm feeling inside. So I wanted it to be more about when the viewer looks at a painting, what do they see? What do they feel? Give the viewer something to feel, give the viewer something to experience. Because ultimately a painting is something for someone else to look at. And once I paint it, it's not for me anymore. It's for other people. So giving the viewer something to look at and something to feel and experience is the main idea behind most of my paintings that I did. I like to add texture to. There's certain paintings that I made sure I didn't put any texture in it. Like Temples of Contest, it's very smooth, and I wanted the brush strokes to be like to make the brush strokes seem like purposeful and not just haphazardly put on there. So there's certain things, and then like if you look at like Van Gogh, I've been able to see like a Van Gogh painting before in my life, and I've seen other artists that use a lot of texture. And Van Gogh, especially when you look at it under light, it has the paint itself actually creates shadow on the canvas. So that's something that's kind of interesting to me. And so I try to use it to my advantage, use the texture to the advantage of the painting. I grew up in Wyoming, and so it's like vast. I grew up in the desert portion of Wyoming, not the really cool like part that everybody goes to vacation. I grew up in the southern like desert part of Wyoming, which it's vast expanses of long, you can see for miles and miles. And then I moved to Colorado, and I've lived in Washington State and Minneapolis, and I went to Louisiana for a while, and now here. And I just always have felt like once you get into these places, it starts to actually affect what you see, what you feel as a human being in these places. So when you're like, as opposed to when you're standing in the desert in Wyoming, there's a really sense of feeling like alone and by yourself, and there's no one else around and for miles and miles, and there really isn't. And then versus you're standing in the swamps in Louisiana, there's no one else around for miles and miles, but you can't see anything. You're just really closed in. So there's not that, you don't have that feeling. So there's a lot of that compared to like, I think of that feeling the same as like when you stand in the city, when there's a bunch of buildings and you can't see anything, versus when you're standing outside in a cornfield, when the corn is high and you can't see anything, and it's really kind of closed you in, versus when they cut the corn and it's down. And I really, living here, I like that kind of ebb and flow of like the corn going up and you can't really see anything, you feel closed in, you feel by yourself. Then it goes down and you can see like, oh, there's a farm right over there, or there's a thing over there. So like that all kind of experience, like that kind of molds my experience in the world, and I think that comes through in some of my paintings. This piece actually is kind of that whole idea. When I first moved here, I moved here from Louisiana. And when I first moved here, I got out of the car and I couldn't believe how flat it was. It was just unbelievably, like, everything was so flat. And it looked like a postcard. As I looked out on the horizon, it was just like flat postcard. Weird, you know, really odd scenery for someone who just came down from, you know, green, lush vegetation everywhere. And this was actually like, I actually took a photo, and I used the photo to create this piece. And this was actually the road, and then the gravel strip off the side of the road, and then there was a little piece of dirt, and then there was some grass, and then the field was cut, so it was the brown dirt was cut. So the field was cut, and there was the brown dirt, and then the sky. And I thought, man, that's just so flat. And so when I painted this, I was like, I really wanted to get that flatness of like the earth and the flatness of like Illinois, right? So I was like, man, it's so flat. So I really wanted to try and do that. And when I painted it, I painted it was really smooth. I made sure it was flat. And then so I was like, oh, but it's so flat. It's so flat. It's not working as a painting. As a painting, it didn't work. So then a trick that artists use to create depth in a canvas is to put an oval on it. So if you put an oval on something, it makes you feel like there's depth to it. So, because everybody knows what a circle is, and then when you turn it to the side, you see an oval. So I was like, okay, I cut out these pieces of paper, I put some ovals, I cut some ovals out, and I put them on there, and I was like, okay, maybe that's gonna work. That'll give it this sense of depth also, and the flatness. So this is kind of, I'm trying to kind of play with that whole depth and flatness, and what is depth and what is flatness, and it's still a painting. It's still a flat piece of, you know, it's not a sculpture. So that's when I was like, okay, now I got to make a texture to make these ovals stand out. So I made a texture to make those ovals stand out to where it's like that give and take of that flatness and the texture, the flatness of the landscape, and the landscape is flat, but it's not. It's actually, there's a lot of depth to it. There's a lot of things that happen. So that's kind of where this painting came about. This is another painting that kind of goes with the whole idea of landscape, but it's one that I've taken and actually like pulled the canvas out of the canvas. So essentially what I did was I stretched the canvas and then put another canvas on top of that and let it dry. That made these larger shapes that actually come out of the canvas. And ultimately, when I was doing it, I was thinking about like landscapes and mountainscapes and how does that look when you're looking at it in the wild, when you're looking at a mountain versus like when you're looking at it on a piece of paper. So like there's certain things that happen when you look at a mountain that gives you that sense of depth, and versus a piece of paper, which is this flat surface, or this canvas, which is this flat surface. And how a mountain then like goes back and forward. There's parts that stick out closer to you. There's parts that are back. So how do you convey that how do you convey that as an artist or as a painter or as someone who draws? So there's ways to use value or hue or other, there's ways to do things to make things look like it's closer to you or look like it's further away from you. So the idea of this came from, there's a painting here in this show called The Beginning. And it was a painting I did really quick in my in my room. I just did it really quick, and it's kind of like a landscape on the bottom, and there's it's kind of got these same colors of like a cloud on the top. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool idea. these big clouds that are in the sky that aren't clouds. They're something else. They're something different than what a cloud is. And so this idea is kind of expands on that whole idea of a cloud in the sky that's not a cloud, that's an object. And I painted this. There's a couple of the paintings here. I've actually painted the edge of the canvas, which I've never done before. I started doing that because I think it makes the paintings themselves the objects. So as the viewer, as you're looking at them, they themselves are the objects that you're supposed to be looking at, and it's not in this frame. Like, this whole thing is an object, and it's not a painting in a frame. It's an object to look at, to try to, get some sort of emotion from. And that's where that's again going back to the viewer is the one that these are for. It's not for me. It's not for like I did this because I felt this way, or I did this because I did this so that somebody could look at it and have an experience that maybe they've never had before, and that's kind of the whole idea, and kind of where I was going with kind of a lot of the paintings in this series of paintings that I made. That's the thing too, is like everybody has their own different things. And I found that that's just incredible. Like, that's an incredible thing that, like, humans, as human beings, that we look at things and we assign stories to them. Like, why do I think that's the more interesting, like, question, is why as humans do we look at an object and say, oh, that object is a thing, that has, we assign all these stories and all these ideas to these objects. And I think that that's kind of like, it kind of like, this kind of like pulls on that like idea of like, you're a human. If you look at these things, you're going to want to think about, whoa, what does this mean? How does it make me feel? What does it do to me as a person? Have I thought this way before? So the process of doing this, I had a canvas, I stretched it, and I gessoed the canvas just like a regular flat gessoed canvas. And then I took the canvas out. I took another piece of canvas that was, just a little bit, it's about the same size of the canvas that the first one. And I painted the gesso on the back side of it, and I painted the gesso on the front side of it. So the whole thing was soaked in gesso. And then I applied it to the previously gessoed canvas, and then put the folds in it where I wanted the folds to be, and then let it dry. And then when it dries really hard. So it's, I don't know, something with the gesso and the canvas and how it all works out. It dries really hard, and it just pretty much sticks on there. So it's kind of an experiment that way. I didn't know that it was going to work or not, but it worked out pretty good. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved like Wyeth, Andrew Wyeth. I've loved like the way he's kind of got that same thing where it's like landscape paintings, but it's like real, but it's not real. There's a whole like surrealism thing to it where he also has like things in the foreground that are really in focus, and things in the background in the same painting that are really in focus. So it brings that like flatness but it's not flat. So I really like Andrew Wyeth and the way he like works and draws and does the things that he does. But when I was looking at this, like Kazimir Malevich, I got into like his like whole idea of like supremacy in art, and like you could make just a square on a canvas and it's gonna, and I think that kind of pulls into that whole idea where he's like, it's for somebody to look at and to have an experience with. And I think that's kind of that might be where that whole idea comes from. And why do we as humans, that's the question, why do we as humans like want to make a story up for objects that we see? I think that's kind of the crux of the whole thing, I guess. Ultimately, I think it's like, I was a musician before this. I played music a lot, and I played I listen to a lot of music, and I look at a lot of art, and I think that that's something too. I don't ever like try to like say, oh, like, well, this is what I'm going to try to be like, or this is what I'm going to try to be like. I think it was Keith Richards, I think, that said, like, he's like, when you're an artist or you're a musician or you're somebody, you soak up as much as you can like a sponge, and you soak it all up, and then hopefully when you're creating or when you're doing something, some of that gets squeezed out. And so that's kind of like, I think that's kind of the way I am. Like, I look at a lot of different artwork all the time, and I try to like see as much as I can, because there's so much to see, you know? So I try to see as much as I can, and try to listen to as much things as I can, go in the world and see as much things as I can. And then hopefully like some of that all comes out when I'm creating something, you know? The thing I enjoy most about it is just the act of doing it. Like, that's where I'm the most like, that's where I feel the most like fulfilled as a person. So like as a person, if I'm like in the act of creating something, like that's when I feel like, man, this is it, I'm doing it, you know, like. And I think there's a lot of things, you know, as being a musician for so long, when I was a musician, there was a lot of things that like, you write a song and you're in a feeling when you write the song, or you paint a painting and you feel a certain way when you're painting it. But once you like record the song, or once you paint the painting, then it no longer belongs to, it's no longer my feeling anymore. It belongs to the person who's looking at it, so, or who's listening to the song. And then they listen to the song, or they look at the painting, and they can put onto it their life. You know, I think that's the important thing. It's like, so like, it's no longer about what I intentionally wrote it for. And so it's more about how that makes that other person feel.